Yeah, can I have your attention, please? We'll call this meeting to order. And today, first on the agenda, we're going to go a little bit backwards. We have a presenter here today. His name is Russ Davis. We've spoken to you about charter school issues in Massachusetts. It's a big issue because you have groups like Stand for Children and other groups that I'm sure Russ will mention. Those groups stand for everything but children. And I'm sure he'll explain that a little bit better. We've mentioned it before in our meetings, but we thought that it was, we saw a presentation at the AFL-CIO conference, and they were offering their hand to come and speak to unions if we wanted them. So we reached out to Juan Cofield, and we have Russ Davis here today to talk a little bit about the charter school issues.
Thanks, Bob. Hey everybody, my name is Russ Davis. Thanks for having me. I'm the Executive Director of Massachusetts Jobs with Justice, which is a coalition of unions and community groups that fights for workers' rights. And I want to thank you guys for your support over the years. And I also want to thank you for your support for the Verizon strike and the fight that they waged. They won a huge victory, and it's not often that workers these days not just hold our own, but actually win something. And they were able to win over 1,000 new jobs. They got a first contract for Verizon wireless workers for the first time in history. And they beat back most of the concessions, including the outsourcing and some of the attacks on retirees. So I say that because we're at a time in the United States where workers are tired of just taking it all the time, and we hear from the employers and folks that are sympathetic to them in government that, we have to give back, but now after, all these years of giving back, we see the economy picking up, and people can't survive anymore with just giving things back. So people are actually fighting and winning things. We also saw that in the recent Stop and Shop contract, where workers made major gains in a private sector employer. So that's inspiring for those folks that also work in the public sector, because if the private sector is doing better and workers are doing better in the private sector, it also lessens the argument about why folks in the public sector should be constantly giving back, because the mantra these days is, well, folks in the private sector don't have it, so why should you have it? So now we see people standing up and fighting for health care and pensions and better wages and job security, and that's as important to folks in the public sector as it is in the private sector. And I'm here to talk about, and I'll try to make it brief and see if there are any questions. What people probably don't realize is the biggest attack on workers happening in the United States today, which is the attack on public education. There are several million teachers in the two teachers unions, as well as lots of folks that support the children in the schools, from people that work in the lunchroom to paraprofessionals to school psychologists to building and maintenance. So there's a lot of good union jobs at stake here. And the corporations and the billionaires that run this country have had their eye on it for a long time. There's over $1 trillion spent on education in this country, and that's a lot of money when they think about, oh, that's the public money, right? Spent for a public good. It should be something we could be making money off of. So they have a lot of reasons to go after this particular sector. One of them is to destroy the teachers' unions, which are one of the largest group of workers in this country, and are major supports for progressive things that we all support. So that would be one reason. The other is that obviously to make money, if they can privatize the schools and make those jobs private jobs, they can lower the wages, they can eliminate benefits, and so we're already seeing that in some of these charter schools where they bring teachers in with no qualifications, they make much less money, and we're a little fortunate in Massachusetts that things haven't gone as far, but in places like New Orleans, the entire school system is now privatized except for a couple of schools. And those teachers and other folks in the schools are making much less than teachers do in other places. And it's not just about what the teachers make, but it's also the kind of education the kids are getting. Here in Massachusetts, all public school teachers are supposed to have a master's degree, because we view education in Massachusetts as the best public schools in the country for a reason, and we view education as a really important thing, and it's a profession. It's something that you learn, that you get good at. Obviously there are some teachers that probably shouldn't be teaching anymore, but it really needs to be the kind of thing where people invest their lives into learning how to teach kids and educate folks, and that is obviously going to be one of the major factors of people coming out of poverty and getting decent jobs and having a future for themselves. So it's also part of our basic democracy in this country. If we end up with a two-tier education system, so the elite get one kind of education and the rest of us get enough education to work in a Walmart, that's a vision that is not going to be very helpful for our country and a democracy in this country in the future. And that's really what the agenda is here. So what you have, and I'll try to be quick, is you have a national campaign and a state level campaign funded by billionaires like the Walton family that own Walmart. You have the hedge fund billionaires out of New York funding this stuff. They call it education reform, but it's really privatization, union busting, and degradation of public education, where they have children of color, primarily in the urban schools, are now put into these charter schools which have hyper-discipline. People can be suspended for wearing the wrong color socks, for dropping a pencil and picking up without asking permission. So they're trying to destroy any kind of critical thinking and public initiative by those kids to become, the full-rounded citizens that we think everybody should be. And this is the ideology that there has to be a certain kind of education for some kids and a good rounded education for kids in places like Wellesley and Newton, who are going to have music and math and foreign language, whereas these urban schools are only supposed to teach the test, which means basically English and math and learning how to take tests, and that's the kind of education they're getting. So we have some charter schools. We have about 80 in Massachusetts now. There are laws that protect public schools and keep them from expanding that. And these folks have spent millions of dollars to put a question on the ballot in November to raise the cap, what we call the cap on charter schools, which limits the number of charter schools. Because basically what happens is when you set up a charter school, which is a privately operated, privately run school, but that takes children out of the public schools, they get the money from those kids that's taken directly out of the public schools of that city. So if you set up a charter school in Everett, for example, all of the kids from Everett that go to that charter school, they take the money that gets spent on them to that charter school, and that's taken out of the public schools. And then what happens is the kids with the most learning problems, kids with special ed needs or English language learners, they get kicked out of these schools and sent back to the public schools. Or kids with discipline problems that need extra support, they get kicked out of the charter schools, sent back to the public schools, who then have less resources to teach kids that are harder to teach, right? Because those kids need special attention, they need special supports, but there's less money to do that. So you end up with sort of a vicious cycle where more and more of the kids that are the sort of easiest to teach end up in the charter schools, who are quick to suspend and expel kids if they don't fit into their model, and they end up back in the public schools with less funding in the end, and that degrades the public education system in the state. So we have put together a coalition called Save Our Public Schools, which we hope your local will join. It's supported by almost all of the unions in the state, but a lot of community organizations as well, including the NAACP and other community organizations that view these kinds of schools as bad for children of color. And they're going to make the argument that that's, who's going to benefit from charter schools. There are some kids that benefit from the schools and that kind of discipline, but overall it's bad public policy. It's bad for the people that teach in the schools, it's bad for the kids, and it's bad for the parents. So there's going to be a question on the ballot in November. We don't know the number yet because we haven't gone through the whole process with the Attorney General, but we're urging folks to vote no, but not just to oppose charter schools, but to think about how we can make public schools better in this, how we can fund them. There's another initiative you may have heard about, which we can talk about at some other time, where we're actually trying to put a millionaire's tax and change the Constitution of Massachusetts to have a millionaire's tax for people who make $1 million or more. It would raise $1.6 billion extra for public education and public transportation. People that take the T know that that is in dire shape. We're facing another fare increase in July, and we're also looking at major budget cuts in the schools. So it's not like there isn't a lot of wealth around here in Massachusetts. The rich are doing plenty well here in Massachusetts and around the country, and we think if they pay a little bit extra, that will help schools and public transportation. So it's all connected, but really we want to begin a conversation about how we can have a good public education schools there's absolutely no control by the local community of the schools. They set up their own private boards that are accountable only to themselves. So we ask for your support for the Save Our Public Schools campaign, and I don't know if you have any questions or comments, but I'm
I
happy
just
to.
have a couple of things I might add. Russ talked about the Verizon strike, and I gave you a little blurb there about the Verizon settlement from the AFL-CIO. We all know that they settled and it's a good contract, but if you look at the second paragraph on that letter, that to me tells the whole story. It says Secretary Perez, who's the Secretary of Labor appointed by President Obama, sent down the federal mediators to mediate that deal. And, you know, what a novel idea. You know, you get a mediator that sits down with management and with unions, and they come up with a deal that everybody can, you know, agree to. That's how it's supposed to work. So think about that, you know, when you vote in November. On the millionaires tax, I'm told that there's 14,000 millionaires in Massachusetts. Let me clarify that a little bit. There's 14,000 people who make $1 million income. We're not talking about, you know, their houses and their, you know, there's plenty of people that are worth a whole lot more than $1 million, but there's 14,000 people that make over $1 million in their wages. So those are the people that they're targeting, and it's only a 4% tax. Most people that you ask, you know, do you think the millionaires should pay their fair share? It's a resounding yes, they should. So I think that's about it. Do you have any questions for us? Jonathan?
Yeah, there are two models for the charter school, right? There's the locally approved, and then some can go a state route. So in one case, they're funded by the local community, and not all the money comes out of the school, but where it's if it's a state chartered school, I mean, they're paid directly by the state, correct?
So there are what's called in-district charter schools, which are part of the public school system of that town or city. And, you know, they are funded just like any other school, so in that sense they take money, but there is local oversight and control. The workers, by and large, are members of the union. So there are autonomous schools within the school district that have some of their own rules and stuff. And those aren't the ones we're talking about. What we're talking about are the state chartered schools that can be imposed on a community against its will. Like I live in Gloucester, and we had a charter school imposed on us. Everybody, including our Republican state senator, was against it. But the state said, no, you know, we want this school. And after 2 years, it collapsed because of financial mismanagement, which people had been predicting, and other things. And so those kids got screwed because they had 2 years of completely disrupted education, and then end up back in the public school system, you know, and have to catch up to all the kids that were, you know, going along normally. So those are the schools we're talking about. The cap, as we call it, limits the number of state-approved charter schools, and that's what we're trying to keep from happening on the ballot. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I just want to thank Russ for coming in, and he's got some flyers on the on the vote.
I'll leave a few here, and then if you want to fill that out, and you guys can officially endorse the campaign. But thanks, everybody.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
So I know you said like the Waltons, and I know, I think they mentioned that the conference bill and the Linda Gates Foundation or whatever
Yep.
are really aggressively targeting Massachusetts for charter schools to bring more to here. So I'm just not exactly sure what's in it for them. What's in it for these wealthy? Is it to purchase buildings under and make money that way? I mean, I'm just a little confused.
Yeah. So there are a few things. There are some people who see this as a business opportunity.
Right.
So, for example, all those tests that the kids take now, MCAS and all that, that's a for-profit company that produces those tests called Pearson. So they're making money off of public education, and if you can privatize the schools like they have in some parts of the country, those are actually run as for-profit corporations. State law in Massachusetts prevents for-profit schools from operating here, but some of the charter schools are operated by for-profit companies. In other words, the charter school board hires for-profit companies to run the school. So that happens, and then there are other ways that they can make money through contracts and consulting and stuff like that. But as I said, the other thing is, as Bob said, union busting and sort of their ideological opposition to public sector anything, right? So they think everything should be privatized. They think everything should be an opportunity for somebody to make a buck. So if they can take that step along that path through the charter schools and destroy two of the biggest unions in the AFL-CIO in the process, that's a benefit because those two unions are part of what keeps some of the worst laws from happening across the country. So there's a lot of different agendas there as to why they're doing that, and you know, they do it under the guise of philanthropy, right? That this is all being done by their philanthropical things, but it's really a political agenda. The people who are leading the charter school fight here in Massachusetts is Charlie Baker, Karen Polito, the lieutenant governor, and the other right-wing Republicans who are on board and financing this. And that, if you look at the donors of who's financing the campaign, there are billionaires from Wall Street, the same people that we think are basically running our country and our economy into the ground, and that's who's supporting the charter schools. So, did that answer your question?
It did, yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
We've got a pretty full agenda. So.